Imagine spending, I don't know, like 4 years of your life taking on this massive student debt. And you're grinding away through sleepless nights to master a highly technical degree.
Yeah, the classic path.
Right. And you walk out into the world, resume in hand, thinking you've completely secured your future
Right.
because you know the coding languages or the engineering principles, the financial
Well,
modeling.
here at skills.
Exactly. But what if I told you that all of that specialized knowledge, all that stuff society tells us is the ultimate metric of potential? It only accounts for like 15% of your actual financial success.
It is a staggering reality check for most people. I mean, we pour virtually all of our educational and professional resources into that 15%,
Yeah.
and we just completely ignore the machinery that drives the other 85% of our capabilities.
I was absolutely floored when I read that. So we're taking a deep dive today into Manoj Tripathi's research on the power of ignored skills.
Mm-hmm.
And according to this landmark study by the Carnegie Institute that he cites, 85% of long-term success actually stems from personality, communication, and like a very specific set of seemingly mundane skills that we largely just brush off.
We do, yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We obsess over hard metrics, so how did we get the equation so backward? And more importantly, what exactly is sitting inside that missing 85%?
Well, to understand the oversight, it really helps to rewind the clock about 2.5 million years.
Okay, going way back.
Yeah, way back. Because humans did not survive and eventually dominate the globe because of our physical attributes.
Right.
If you put a fully grown, unarmed human up against a hungry predator on the savannah, the human is losing that fight every time.
Oh yeah, we are physically pathetic compared to a lion.
Exactly. So our survival depended purely on a different set of mechanisms. It was our ability to keenly observe subtle changes in the environment, recognize complex patterns, and then communicate those patterns to the rest of the tribe.
So the skills that make up that 85%, they aren't actually new business strategies at all.
No, not
There's our foundational survival mechanisms. I guess we take them for granted because the stakes don't feel like life or death anymore. Like I'm not scanning the bushes for a lion on my morning commute.
right. And that is the core of the issue.
Yeah.
These abilities are so deeply innate that they feel automatic.
Mm-hmm.
We assume we're already doing them. And because they're so common, we just stop actively training them.
Right.
But the people who deliberately cultivate these traits, observation, contextual analysis, purposeful communication, those are the ones who unlock that extraordinary disproportionate success.
And the absolute bedrock of all of this, according to the sources, is the art of observation, just seeing what is already sitting right in front of you.
Mm.
But there's a massive difference between looking at something and actually observing it, right?
Definitely. Looking is passive, but observation is active. It requires pausing your default mental filters. A perfect historical case study of this mechanism in action is Georges de Mistral back in 1955.
Oh, the Velcro guy.
The Velcro guy, yeah.
Yeah.
He was a Swiss engineer who just took his dog for a walk in the woods. And when he returned, he noticed his clothes and his dog's fur were just covered in those little burdock burrs.
Which is an incredibly common, super annoying experience. I mean, the default human reaction is to just aggressively pick them off, throw them in the trash, and go on with your day.
Right. Most people just want to solve the immediate annoyance and move on. But Mistral stopped to ask why the annoyance was happening.
Yeah.
Why were these specific seeds so stubbornly attached to the fabric? He actively observed. He actually put the burrs under a microscope.
Wow.
And he saw these tiny, stiff, hook-like structures that were perfectly catching the soft loops of his clothing. And then he spent the next decade figuring out how to synthetically replicate that exact hook and loop mechanism.
And he ends up inventing Velcro, like an entire global industry born from just paying attention to a dog covered in seeds.
Yeah, it's active observation bridging into lateral thinking. You take a mechanism from one domain, like nature, and you apply it to a completely different domain.
That makes me think of Dick Fosbury at the 1968 Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
His story in the text perfectly captures how lateral thinking completely rewrites the rules of a domain. Because before Fosbury, elite high jumpers used methods like the scissors or the Western roll.
Right, the traditional methods.
Yeah, they would run up and straddle the bar face forward, basically trying to keep their center of gravity over their feet so they could land safely in the dirt or the sand pit on the other side.
Yeah, Fosbury was struggling to compete using those traditional mechanics.
Mm.
So he inverted the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of asking, how do I get my legs over this bar while staying upright, he asked, how do I get my center of mass over the bar regardless of how I land?
Right.
So he started sprinting, turning his back to the bar and arching his spine backward, which became known as the Fosbury flop.
Yeah, the press called him the world's laziest high jumper because it looked so absurd at the time.
Right.
But he won gold, he set an Olympic record, and today literally every high jumper uses his technique. But reading through the source material, there's this detail here that completely shifts how I understand this story.
The environmental catalyst.
Yes, Fosbury didn't just have a sudden flash of isolated genius. His lateral thinking was actually a response to a new tool in his environment.
Exactly.
His high school was one of the very first in the country to replace the old hard dirt and wood chip landing pits with deep, soft foam mats.
And that is the critical nuance. If Fosbury attempts to jump backward over a bar and land on his neck in a pit of wood chips, his athletic career ends instantly.
Oh, absolutely. He'd break his neck.
Right. But he observed a change in his physical environment, the introduction of the foam mat, and he realized the safety constraints of the sport had fundamentally shifted.
Wow.
The new environment allowed him to innovate a technique that was previously fatal.
Yeah.
You cannot innovate if you aren't constantly scanning your environment to see what new tools have been quietly handed to you.
It's about utilizing the raw materials sitting right next to you, which actually transitions perfectly into this corporate example from the text that I'm still laughing about.
Oh, the toothpaste factory.
The toothpaste factory. It perfectly highlights how our modern obsession with that 15% technical skill can actually blind us.
It is an incredible illustration of over-engineering a simple problem.
Okay, so a major toothpaste manufacturer realizes they have a quality control issue. Every so often, a toothpaste box makes it through the rapid assembly line without an actual tube of toothpaste inside it.
Right.
So customers are buying sealed boxes of empty air, and it's turning into this huge PR nightmare. So leadership does what corporate leadership does. They assemble task forces, they hire an external engineering firm, they run cost-benefit analyses.
Naturally.
And 2 months and roughly $100,000 later, they install a high-tech, highly sensitive scale on the conveyor belt.
An incredibly precise, very expensive piece of machinery.
Absolutely. The system is designed so that if a box rolls over the scale and weighs even a fraction of an ounce too light, an alarm blares, flashing lights go off, the entire production line stops.
A huge disruption.
Yeah, and a floor worker has to walk over, remove the empty box, press a reset button, and restart the line. And the executives are thrilled. The data shows 0 empty boxes are being shipped.
Until the CEO goes down to the factory floor a few months later to admire his expensive new system.
Right. He walks up to the $1 million scale, and sitting right next to the conveyor belt, just a few feet before the boxes reach the sensor, is a cheap $5 plastic desk fan.
Yes.
It's just plugged into the wall, aimed directly at the belt, quietly blowing the lightweight, empty boxes right off the line and into a trash bin before they ever even trigger the alarm.
It's so good.
The floor operators had gotten so tired of the siren constantly stopping their workflow that they just bought a fan to do the sorting for them. I see this mentality in modern companies constantly. Why is human nature so eager to spend $100,000 on a complicated scale when the $5 fan is sitting right there?
Well, it comes down to a psychological need to validate our technical expertise. If you've spent years becoming a specialized engineer, your brain defaults to engineering solutions. You want to build the sophisticated scale because it utilizes your specific 15% skill set.
Right.
Buying a desk fan doesn't require an engineering degree, so the ego rejects it as a valid corporate solution. True lateral thinking requires the discipline to step back, observe the pure mechanics of a problem, and just suppress the urge to be clever in favor of just being effective.
That requires taking off your blinders. Because observing the physical environment right in front of you, the burrs, the foam mats, the assembly line, that's only the first step. The text suggests that the next level of the 85% is the ability to observe invisible, distant connections, like the butterfly effect.
Yes. We live in highly interconnected systems. A minor shift in one node can cascade into massive, unseen consequences in another.
Right.
The sources illustrate this beautifully with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. The physical engineering took place in Egypt, carving a waterway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea.
But the economic shockwave hit India.
Exactly. Prior to the canal, Bombay was a relatively modest port. But the Suez Canal suddenly cut the shipping distance between London and Bombay by roughly 40%.
Wow.
The resulting flood of maritime traffic transformed Bombay into the financial capital of India almost overnight. Geography was altered in Africa, and wealth was created in Asia.
The sources outline another historical example of this macro cause and effect, but one with a much darker outcome.
Hmm.
In the mid-20th century, the U.S. government wanted to support its domestic agricultural sector, so they heavily subsidized American cotton farmers. And the goal was simply to help domestic farmers compete against international pricing from places like China and India.
It's a textbook case of localized policy creating a global ripple. When the U.S. heavily subsidized its cotton, it inadvertently flooded the international market with artificially cheap product,
Right.
and global cotton prices plummeted as a result.
And the invisible consequence happened half a world away. In the rural regions of India, you had thousands of smallhold farmers who relied on credit tied to the historically stable price of cotton.
Yeah.
When the global price crashed, their local economies collapsed, they couldn't service their debts, and they went bankrupt. And it directly contributed to an epidemic of tragic suicides among farmers in Maharashtra and Gujarat. A domestic policy signed in Washington essentially triggered a humanitarian crisis in rural India.
It reinforces the danger of trying to solve a localized problem without mapping out the broader human ecosystem.
Yeah.
If you don't connect the dots, your solution will often create a catastrophic byproduct, which is exactly what happened during British colonial rule with the snake effect.
Yeah, the Cobra bounty. This is one of those historical blunders that is almost too perfectly flawed to believe.
It really is.
So Delhi had a severe infestation of venomous cobras. The colonial governor looks at the problem and issues what seems, on paper, like a highly logical, data-driven decree. The government will pay a cash reward to any citizen who brings in a dead cobra.
And the intention is straightforward. Incentivize the local population to become exterminators.
And it works initially. The government is paying out bounties, dead snakes are piling up, but they fail to account for human behavioral incentives.
Right.
Enterprising citizens realized that hunting wild cobras was dangerous and inefficient, but breeding them in their basements, that was a highly scalable business model.
Oh, yeah.
They started actively farming venomous snakes just to slaughter them and collect the government payout.
And when the authorities eventually realized they were subsidizing local snake farms, they abruptly canceled the bounty program.
Which leaves the breeders with hundreds of live cobras that are suddenly completely worthless. So they did the rational economic thing. They opened the cages and released them all into the streets.
Unbelievable.
The government policy designed to reduce the snake population actually resulted in a significantly worse infestation than before they intervened.
You optimize for a specific, measurable metric, the dead snakes,
Yeah.
but you completely ignore the behavioral changes that metric induces.
I couldn't help but draw an analogy here to modern social media algorithms.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
The platforms want to solve for user engagement, right? So they offer a bounty, algorithmic reach, and ad revenue for content that generates clicks. The creators are the citizens. They realize that carefully researched, nuanced content is hard to hunt. But manufactured outrage, tribalism, clickbait, that is incredibly easy to breed in a basement.
Right.
So the ecosystem gets flooded with toxic, highly engaging content. The platform optimizes for the reward, but completely ignores the behavioral byproduct they are actively farming.
That is a phenomenal parallel. It perfectly demonstrates how relying solely on the obvious data, the clicks or the dead snakes, is not just ineffective, it is actively dangerous.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a critical concept in the source material, survivorship bias.
The World War II fighter planes.
Yes. During the war, the military command realized they were losing too many bombers to German anti-aircraft fire. They needed to add heavy armor to the planes, but they couldn't armor the entire aircraft because it would be too heavy to fly.
Right, they had to be strategic about it.
Exactly. So they analyzed the data, they look at all the planes returning to base after combat missions, and they map out every single bullet hole.
And the data clearly showed that the vast majority of the damage was concentrated on the wings and the tail sections of the aircraft. So the military brass concluded, based entirely on the physical evidence in front of them, that the wings and the tail were getting hit the most, and therefore those were the areas that needed the armor.
But a statistician named Abraham Wald steps in and realizes the military is about to make a fatal error.
Yeah, because of the missing data.
Wald pointed out the invisible flaw in their methodology. They were only analyzing the planes that survived. The data was inherently skewed. The aircraft that took heavy fire to the engine block or the cockpit never made it back to base to be measured. The bullet holes clustered on the wings of the returning planes weren't showing the military where the planes were most vulnerable. They were showing the exact places a plane could sustain damage and still remain airborne.
Wow.
Wald told them they needed to put the heavy armor exactly where the returning planes had no bullet holes.
It is such a profound shift in perspective. If you want to connect the dots, you can't just look at the data you have. You have to train yourself to aggressively hunt for the data that is missing.
Exactly.
And the sources translate this perfectly into a modern business context with a retail
The
analogy.
struggling shop owner.
Right. A store owner wants to know why revenue is flat. So he walks the aisles with a clipboard, surveying everyone inside his store. He asks, "How can we improve your experience?" And the shoppers tell him they want a wider variety of products. So he invests heavily in new inventory, stocks the shelves, and sales don't move an inch.
Because he is only surveying the planes that survived the flight.
Right.
He is exclusively asking the people who already managed to get into his store.
Exactly. He is gathering data, but it's the wrong data.
Yeah.
He finally decides to survey the people in the surrounding neighborhood who don't shop at his store. And they give him the actual missing data. They tell him, "We would love to buy your products, but your parking lot is too small and we can never find a space."
Wow.
Variety was never the issue. Connecting the dots means realizing that your non-customers hold the insights that your loyal customers literally cannot see.
But here is the friction point. Let's say you master observation. You spot the foam mat. You find the missing data. You avoid the snake effect. You have the perfect intellectual solution. You still have to get a team of human beings to actually execute that solution.
Yeah.
And data does not execute itself.
Which requires mastering the human engine, the ignored skills of communication and purpose.
The research on human communication is highly counterintuitive to how we are trained in the corporate world. We obsess over drafting the perfect email, choosing the exact right vocabulary for a pitch deck.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight that up to 93% of interpersonal communication is nonverbal. Furthermore, 90% of workplace friction and arguments stem not from the actual words spoken, but from the tone in which they are delivered.
We are biologically wired to react to framing and emotion, not spreadsheets. Steve Jobs is the classic example in the text of someone who understood how to translate cold data into human resonance.
Oh, for sure.
When Apple was preparing to launch the original iPod in 2001, his engineering team was hyper-focused on the technical achievement. They wanted to market the device based on its specs, a revolutionary portable 5 GB storage drive.
Which is logically accurate but emotionally sterile. 5 gigabytes is an abstract metric. It doesn't tell the human brain why it should care.
Jobs reframed the exact same piece of technology. He didn't sell the data. He sold the human experience. He walked on stage and pitched it as 1,000 songs in your pocket.
It instantly communicates the value proposition in a language the listener actually values.
Yeah.
But Jobs didn't just use this communication style to sell products to consumers. He used it internally to harness something much more powerful. Human purpose.
And this is where the sources get into some deeply fascinating biology. Because we throw around the word purpose like it's just fluffy HR jargon, but it's actually a physiological requirement.
The Japanese concept of ikigai. Your reason for being, the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, it is a measurable biological driver.
Right.
The sources cite an internal study conducted by Shell Oil looking at the lifespan of their own employees. They discovered a highly counterintuitive statistic. Employees who retired early, at age 55, were actually statistically likely to die sooner than employees who continued working until age 65.
See, when I read that, it broke my brain a little bit. Retiring 55 to sit on a beach with a pension sounds like the absolute dream. Why on earth would resting earlier kill you faster?
Because humans are fundamentally problem-solving engines. For decades, those employees had a routine, a social hierarchy, and a daily set of challenges to overcome. Their work provided a structural ikigai.
Oh, okay.
When they retired abruptly at 55, they lost that driving mission. And the biology follows the psychology. Without a compelling reason to engage with the world, cognitive load drops, the body's stress response systems like cortisol lose their natural regulatory rhythms, and physical health physically deteriorates.
That's why.
The smartest organizations on the planet understand this biological reality. They don't just offer paychecks, they offer a mission to keep the engine running.
Which brings us back to Jobs and what might be the greatest corporate recruitment pitch in history. In 1983, Apple was still a somewhat scrappy, highly risky computer company, and Jobs decided he needed a seasoned executive to help run it, so he set his sights on John Scully, who was currently the president of Pepsi-Cola.
Scully is sitting at the absolute pinnacle of corporate America at this point. He is highly compensated, running a massive global brand. Logically, He has zero incentive to leave that safety to go gamble on a temperamental founder in Silicon Valley.
So Jobs doesn't pitch him on logic. He doesn't try to outbid Pepsi on salary or stock options. He targets Scully's ikigai. They are standing in New York, looking out over the city, and Jobs asks them one single question. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?
It is a devastatingly effective piece of communication.
He strips away all the corporate safety and forces Scully to confront his own legacy. And the crazy part is, it worked. Scully walked away from Pepsi and took the job.
Yeah.
If you are managing a team today, the lesson here isn't just about crafting a clever sentence. It's about realizing that if you can genuinely connect your team's daily tasks to a larger, meaningful purpose, you unlock a level of loyalty and biological drive that money literally cannot buy.
And when you synthesize all of these ignored skills, when you actively observe the subtle anomalies in your environment, when you hunt for the unseen data to connect the dots, and when you harness the human engine through purposeful communication, you unlock the highest level capability discussed in the text: prediction, forecasting the future.
The word prediction always sounds like a parlor trick, like reading tea leaves, but the sources are very clear that it is a highly mechanical, trainable skill.
There is no magic involved. Prediction is the primary biological function of the human neocortex. Our brains are prediction machines.
Right.
They constantly ingest real-time data, run it against the patterns we've stored from past experiences, and generate a probabilistic forecast of what will happen next. Business leaders who train this faculty are the ones who can steer massive organizations through existential disruptions. Look at Indra Nooyi during her tenure at PepsiCo.
She takes over as CEO in the mid-2000s, and she is immediately under immense pressure from the board of directors. The board is looking at the historical data, the returning planes, so to speak, and demanding she pump their massive R&D and marketing budgets into their traditional, highly profitable junk food and sugary sodas.
Because that is what the 15% technical analysis dictates. But Nooyi was actively observing the periphery. She saw subtle macro shifts in consumer behavior. She connected the dots of early data pointing toward a massive impending global trend in health, wellness, and organic eating.
Right.
She utilized her neocortex to predict that the historical cash cows would eventually stall. So she pushed back against the board, absorbed the criticism, and aggressively diverted PepsiCo's resources toward developing and acquiring healthier, low-calorie snack options.
It was a wildly successful prediction that essentially future-proofed a legacy brand. Contrast that with Kodak, which is a story that physically hurts to read.
Oh, it really does.
In 1975, an engineer inside Kodak named Steve Sasson actually invents the very first digital camera. The technology is quite literally in their hands, decades ahead of the curve.
But Kodak's executive leadership suffered from catastrophic survivorship bias. They looked at their balance sheets and said, "We make all of our immense profits from selling chemical film and photo paper. Why on earth would we spend resources developing a camera that doesn't use film?"
Wow.
They actively bury their own invention to protect their current revenue streams.
And as a result, they eventually filed for bankruptcy because they failed to predict or accept the inevitability of the digital revolution.
They fell victim to the economic principle of creative destruction, championed by the economist Joseph Schumpeter. Schumpeter argued that innovation is an inherently violent process. The creation of the new fundamentally requires the destruction of the old order.
The invention of the automobile completely annihilated the buggy whip industry and put thousands of horse trainers out of work. The introduction of mechanized looms in the 19th century caused literal riots because traditional textile workers lost their livelihoods.
But what Schumpeter pointed out is that the destruction is only half the equation. The automobile destroyed the buggy industry, but it simultaneously birthed an infinitely larger ecosystem of mechanics, highway construction jobs, gas stations, and global logistics.
Right.
The mechanized looms caused short-term pain, but ushered in an era of massive societal prosperity and affordable clothing for the masses.
I see what you mean, but here is where I struggle with the concept of creative destruction today. It is always incredibly easy for us to predict the destruction. We can all easily visualize how artificial intelligence might replace junior copywriters, or how autonomous vehicles will eliminate truck driving jobs. But human imagination almost always fails to predict the creation. We can't visualize the new, bizarre industries that will inevitably rise from the ashes.
That limitation is exactly why these 85% skills are so critical. We mourn the loss of the known because We cannot yet observe the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are actively training your observation, analyzing the unseen data, and communicating with purpose, you give yourself the highest possible vantage point to spot that new horizon before the rest of the market does.
So bringing this all together, what is the ultimate takeaway for the listener who is trying to navigate this landscape? It seems clear that while the rest of the world is desperately scrambling to acquire just one more technical certificate or learn one more coding language to slightly boost that 15% of the success equation, the actual practical shortcut to being highly effective is committing to the mundane.
It is about doing the quiet, unglamorous work. It is training yourself to stop and investigate the burrs stuck to the dog. It is asking what data is missing from the bullet-riddled bomber. It is ensuring that your tone matches your mission and finding the ikigai that keeps your cognitive engine firing.
It's committing to the 85%. But before we close this out, there was a final historical fact from the source text about how the human brain actually evolved to handle these skills in the first place, and I think it frames this entire conversation perfectly.
It is a profound evolutionary quirk. The sources highlight that early hominids were only able to develop these massive, energy-dense brains, the neocortex that handles all of this prediction and lateral thinking, because of a specific technological breakthrough, the mastery of fire and the invention of cooking.
Because the mechanics of eating changed our biology.
Precisely. Digesting raw meat and tough vegetation requires a colossal amount of continuous bodily energy. The digestive tract essentially monopolizes the body's resources. By inventing fire and cooking our food, early humans effectively outsourced a massive portion of that digestive labor to the flames. Cooking pre-digests the calories.
We outsourced our digestion to fire, which freed up all of that biological energy, and evolution redirected it upward to physically grow the neocortex. It caused a cognitive explosion.
Which leaves us with a fascinating and slightly terrifying question to consider today. We are currently standing at the edge of the artificial intelligence revolution.
Right.
And what we are doing day by day is rapidly outsourcing our observation, our data synthesis, and our pattern recognition to algorithms. We are outsourcing our cognition to silicon.
Just like we outsourced our digestion to fire.
Exactly. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, if outsourcing our physical digestion caused a massive evolutionary leap in human intelligence, what will happen to the human mind now that we're outsourcing our thinking?
Wow.
Will handing over the heavy cognitive lifting to AI free up our mental energy for some unimaginable new leap in human evolution? Or will these 85% ignored skills that literally define our humanity simply begin to atrophy and fade away from lack of use?
It brings us right back to the factory floor and the $100,000 scale. We desperately want a clean, engineered, black and white picture of what the future looks like. But the reality is that the technical skills, the coding, the data sorting, the 15% are rapidly being handed over to the machines, which means going forward, your ability to master the mundane, to actively observe, to connect the invisible dots, and to lead with genuine human purpose might be the only skills left that actually matter.